Awesome. So, depending on where this is starting at the recording, welcome to the Seattle Aquarium. My name is Rachel, and I'm one of the educators here, and I'm joined by Kent, who is off. He's going to be doing tech support for me, and he might jump in, chime in, answer some questions. We're going to be kind of tag teaming this a bit. So we are going to be talking a little bit about some of the animals that we had here, a little bit about animal care, and then we have also some live animal ambassadors that are here in the classroom with us that we're going to be getting to have a closer look at. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen. Great. And let me just get 1 second to kind of make sure that I'm seeing everything. Awesome. Okay, so I know that some of you all have probably had a chance to come to the aquarium. If not, I'm just going to give a little bit of background about our location and some fun facts about this particular area and the water that's in Puget Sound. So I have a map of this area. So if you look here, the white dot is where we are here in Seattle. And you notice that we have all of the rivers and lakes that are flowing into the sound. And then we also have the Pacific Ocean on the West Coast. And so what is really unique about Puget Sound is that it is a mix of both freshwater and saltwater. So it's an estuary. And this has kind of creates a really rich environment for a lot of species, both of fish, marine mammals, and birds, which you can actually hear outside. So one thing that we always like to do with our programs is to acknowledge the fact that we are on the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish people, who are the original stewards of these lands and waters for time immemorial. So what you're seeing here is a picture of members of the Muckleshoot tribe who were visiting the aquarium a few years ago as part of the Salmon homecoming celebration. And so you can kind of see in the background in that far left corner is where our aquarium is. And I have another picture just to kind of give you a little view of where I'm at. So this is the aquarium. I'm upstairs in the classroom on the second floor. And down below is where all of our exhibits are. And then we're actually slowly building out a new part of the aquarium, which is going to be on the other side of Alaskan Way. That's part of our expansion. That's going to be coming probably, I think the timeline now is maybe the next 5 years, but that's going to be a really cool thing to see down by the waterfront. So we're just going to talk a little bit about some of the key exhibits that we have here. So one thing that's really unique about our aquarium is that all of the water in our exhibits comes directly from the sound, goes through a minor filtration process, circulates through our exhibits and goes directly back out through our sound. So one really popular area that you see this diver in here is on the Windows on Washington exhibit. And that is meant to look like the environment of Neah Bay, which is located just on the peninsula of, out on the Olympic Peninsula of Washington. And that's where we do a lot of the collecting for the specimens that you see here at the aquarium. And this particular tank can hold, or exhibit area can hold 120,000 gallons of water, which is about the same, almost 3,000 bathtubs full of water, all of which again is being pumped directly in. And so you'll notice that our divers, because they're in this cold water that's around 45 to 50 degrees, they wear dry suits, and they also have special masks that allow them to do interpretive programs from inside of the exhibit. Yeah, and another cool thing about this is that the glass for this exhibit is actually almost like a foot thick, and to place it in, they had to actually remove the ceiling of the aquarium to lower it in by crane. So a little fun fact about Window on Washington. So one thing that the Pacific Northwest is really well known for is its tide pools. So you can see here an example of a tide pool that you might find on the beach. And then we also have our touch tank tide pools here at the aquarium as well. And all of those, if you come to visit the aquarium, you'll notice that we have interpreters who are on the floor giving information to guests. We have a really robust volunteer program. So actually a lot of our interpreters are retirees who come and talk to the public. Some of them have a background in marine science, and a lot of people maybe have just been to a beach. I did the volunteer training. I just moved to Seattle, and I learned all about all of the local tide pools, all of the animals, a lot of the invertebrates, and some of the other critters that we have here. So it's a really cool program that you can either participate in or get to experience when you come to visit the aquarium. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the cool animals that we have that are unique to the Pacific Northwest. So if you look at this animal and you think about what this reminds you of, you might think that it looks a little bit like a sea star, but with a lot more legs. And this is our sunflower star. So instead of sea stars usually have the 5 legs, this has 24 legs. And if you look at it, you'll notice that some of the legs are shorter than the other ones. And that's because sunflower stars, like sea stars, have the ability to regenerate legs. Sometimes if they if a predator or something grabs onto it, they can jettison that leg and then regrow it afterwards. So if you were to come, you might see this in our underwater dome. But we actually have a really cool video. This is from our friends at the Vancouver Aquarium that kind of shows a little bit about how sunflower stars and sea stars eat. So hopefully this video quality will come through, but sunflower stars are predators. So they prowl the ocean, and their favorite food are things like mussels and clams. And when they find them, they use all of those tube feet to pry open the shell. And then you'll see this kind of clear, globby part that's coming out from the central disc. That is right near where their mouth is. And that's actually their stomach that they're projecting outside of their body. And they're going to force it into the shell, release stomach acids, dissolve the inside of the shellfish, and then suck it back into their mouth. So it's a really cool process that happens usually under the water, but we just wanted to share this video so you can kind of see these really amazing predators in action. If you are a local to the Pacific Northwest, you might remember going to the beach and seeing lots and lots of sea stars all the time. If you were to go to the beach today, you would notice that there are a lot less. And that's because there was, this region experienced something called sea star wasting disease, which is a process in which the sea stars, if you see a diseased sea star on the beach that has this, it starts to almost like disintegrate and turn to mush. Scientists are still trying to figure out exactly the cause of it. They're not 100% sure if it is something that is environmental or something that is like a virus or bacteria based, but they're guessing that it might be a little bit of both, and that there's a potential that some of the climate change that we've seen in our waters with increased temperatures has contributed to this disease. So one thing that you'll notice when I'm sharing some of our animals is that we actually don't have any sea stars that are part of our classroom animals because of the risk of the wasting disease. And we just kind of try to make sure that any of our sea stars are in a well circulating tank so that we don't have to worry about the spread of the disease. Okay. We'll keep going. We'll probably do this at the end. Yeah. So the other thing that you're going to see a lot at the aquarium is rockfish. Rockfish are, I kind of think of these almost like little weightlifters. They have these really strong pectoral or front fins that allow them to secure themselves on the bottom of the water and kind of resist some of the wave action that might be happening. So rockfish are one thing that's really special about them is that they can live for over 100 years, and that they don't usually start their reproductive age until usually around 25 to 30. Not so dissimilar to the lifespan of humans, actually. And one thing is that rockfish are really are threatened in our area because of fishing that sometimes will catch rockfish before they actually have a chance to reproduce. We have rockfish that have been in our aquarium. I think some of them since the aquarium opened. So we have some that are over 80 years old. And because we've had them so long in our care, sometimes they require special surgeries. So a really common condition that can happen with rockfish is that they can develop what's called like a glass eye or bug eye, which is where a little gas will start to develop in their eyeball and start to expand. And if not treated, it can cause rupture and infection and can affect the health of the fish. And what our caretakers do here is that they're actually able to perform surgery on our rockfish while they are still alive to remove the eye, so that the animals can live longer and healthier lives. And they do this by that they're moved to a special tank. So we have a special holding area, which we actually, unfortunately, don't have pictures of. But we have special tanks here where there's no sand or gravel. And it's almost like a little fish hospital. And so then to perform the surgery, they remove them and they keep the gills oxygenated with water, and they keep the fish moist, and then they remove the eye. They keep them back in the holding tank, treat them with antifungals, antibacterials, antibiotics within that special tank until the animals are deemed healthy enough to be returned to the exhibit. So some guests, when they come, are a little surprised to see rockfish. We'll have fish with eyes missing, and it's actually a sign of the care that we're able to do here to prolong the life of some of our animals and to treat conditions that might be fatal in other cases. So this is another one of my favorite animals here, which is our wolf eels. So wolf eels, they look very monstrous. I think they're a little disturbing to see. They like to hide in little caves, but what we found is that they're actually very similar to puppies. So they, with our divers, they will come up and they like to get gentle scratches or like pets and treats. One thing that we like to just remind people, especially if you ever go tide pooling or if you come to the aquarium, in our touch tanks, we do have fish, but normally we wouldn't recommend for guests or people on the beach to touch fish. The reason this diver is able to do that is because they're wearing those rubber gloves. What's special about fish is that they actually are covered with a type of kind of a mucus on the outside. That's part of their immune system. So our immune system's on the inside, fish's immune system is on the outside. So if you're ever caring for fish, the oils on your hand can accidentally remove some of that slime, which is damaging to fish's immune system. And so that's why we ask that you refrain from touching them. So the last kind of really general fish that you see a lot here in the aquarium, because it's so important in the Pacific Northwest, are our salmon. So if you're familiar with the salmon's life cycle, you might know that they start off in freshwater rivers. They move to estuaries and then go out to the open ocean where they feed. And then when the time comes, they migrate back to the stream. They actually have an incredible sense of smell that allows them to find the exact stream where they grew up from eggs, and that is where they spawn and then die. So at our aquarium, because they are having to switch between all of these different water environments, we are moving our salmon from between different exhibit areas. So if you come, you can see that we have a fry tank, which is where we have them when they're these juvenile stage. you'll notice that these are river fish, so they have all of these spots on them, and this allows them to hide in, when they're in the river, it allows them to kind of camouflage with the rocks. And then in nature, that they would then kind of drift down into the estuary, like what we might have here in Puget Sound. And so as they're going from freshwater to saltwater, their body goes through a lot of changes where they adapt to being in a saltwater environment, and also their attitudes change. So I think about juvenile salmon as kind of being very like territorial. They don't really play well with others. But then as they come to the estuary, they go through this process called smoltification. And as their bodies change, they start to learn schooling behavior. So one of my favorite areas is we have our estuary tank with salmon, and you'll just see them all schooled together like that. And this is a tank that is that mix of fresh and salt water. And then after they reach maturity, they'll turn to a really more pure silver color. And that's when they usually move into either our underwater dome or our Windows on Washington saltwater dome. Unfortunately, so we used to have a actual salmon rearing and release program. And so if you come here, sometimes you can see the leftovers of a fish ladder, but that did not prove to be a super successful or cost-effective program. And so that was something that was ended, I believe, over 20 or 30 years ago. So most of our salmon will kind of live out their lives in our aquarium, in these two saltwater tanks. Usually in the wild, then their bodies will start to change to that bright red color, and you'll see them start to turn a little bit that red color, but not quite what you would see in the normal streams. So that is a lot of information. I'm going to pause for 1 second. Take some questions, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our more, I like to call them our charismatic animals, like our octopus and some of our sea mammals, marine mammals, and then we'll also be looking at our animals. But with what we've talked about, especially related to our fish or our invertebrates, are there any questions that I can answer?
I have a question about the rockfish.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in them. There was an article recently about them and how some of them have lived for over 100 years, like you say, and they can actually find when the atomic bomb went off, and they can find that in their bones. So when was it discovered that they lived so long?
Well,
I remember when otoliths started first getting used to age them. So
I'm going to put Kent a little bit closer to our microphone.
hi, so this is Kent, and so Rachel and I were just talking about rockfish specifically before we started, because they're really interesting, and one of those things that makes them so interesting is how we discovered that they live so long. And I'm not sure exactly when that was discovered, but as far as I know, I think it was in the 70s is when fisheries scientists started learning about the bones in their ears, being able to use those to tell how old they are. Those are called otoliths.
Yeah.
And basically, as they grow, they add layers of bone to these little kind of round ear bones, these otoliths. And so when scientists are trying to figure out how old the rockfish is, or any fish, all bony fish have these, they found that, like, oh my gosh, there's dozens and dozens of layers of these otoliths, and these fish then therefore can be decades and decades old. And so, and a lot of times, similar to in tree rings, if the fish is exposed to or is eating food that's high in certain radioisotopes, things like that, they'll show up in those layers. And so, yeah, so they can go back and trace, like, oh yeah, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, there's this layer of otolith material that has a lot of these radioactive isotopes in it. And that shows them that, yeah, they were out there when the atomic bombs were tested out in the Pacific.
It's kind of, Ken was comparing it to how we might measure the age of a tree with tree rings, and then you can also kind of see certain events that happen over that tree's lifespan. So that's what's happening when you're using the ear bones to age fish. It's a great question.
Should we be harvesting rockfish if it takes so long for them to mature?
So that's a big thing which has to do with sustainable seafood, which is kind of a big mission here. So there are resources that can help you understand, especially seafood that you might buy yourself. And, you know, with restaurants, obviously it becomes a little bit trickier. So it is possible to sustainably catch rockfish after they have reached their spawning age. So that's like the big thing. But what often happens with certain fishing practices, especially with, what are those nets? The
Trolls.
yes, trawls,
Yeah.
where the rockfish, juvenile rockfish, which are still quite large, will get caught in these nets that usually are catching mature fish. And so that's why a lot of, there's an app, I think it's called Seafood Watch. And it's, they have lots of information where you can actually find out what is the correct season and method in which a particular fish can be sustainably caught. So when you go to a store or a restaurant, you can ask a little bit about the origin of the fish if they know it.
Oh, good. Okay, so Seafood Watch, and it's an app.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And sometimes I think we have them here at the aquarium, but like you can get little tiny, like wallet-sized, like booklets too that are pretty good, like quick reference guides as well.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you had more on this, I don't want to interrupt.
No, the rest of ours is gonna be about our marine mammals and our octopus. So anything about what I've talked about, go ahead.
Oh, cool. No, this is actually not about what you talked about. So should I save it for the end?
Sure, yeah, maybe I'll cover it. We'll see.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll shut up then.
Cool. So we will mute everyone again. And I'm gonna kind of go back to the PowerPoint. I'm gonna talk a little bit about some of our other friends. Okay, so yeah, great. Thank you for putting yourselves on mute. We're gonna share our screen. Okay, so I will say that probably one of the most popular animals here at the aquarium is our giant Pacific octopus. So one thing that's really special about living in this area is that we are in the native grounds of one of the largest species of octopus in the world. Their arm span can reach over 20 feet or more, which is, if stretched, is almost the height of 2 stories, which is kind of crazy to think about. We normally don't keep octopus that long. So they usually live for about 3 to 4 years. And we will catch our octopus when they are in usually much smaller, and then we release them right before they're ready to spawn. And one thing that's also unique about them, similar to salmon, is that they're terminal breeders. So they will die after they have reproduced. And I have a video, I think, of R1 in the next slide, so you can kind of see this beautiful critter in action. I'm not sure which one this is because we cycle through them a lot. Our current octopus is named Licorice. It's a male octopus. And as you can tell, they also, I don't know if they do it in this one, but they are able to change colors. And that's because they have the what are the names of those? Chromatophores, which are color cells underneath their, in their flesh, and they kind of will stretch their flesh in different ways to highlight different colors to allow themselves to blend in with their environment. Many people might know that octopus are really notorious escape artists. So they don't have any bones. They're all soft tissues except for their hard beak, which they use to kind of break apart things like crabs, very similar to how a parrot does, which is usually about like maybe the size of a quarter or a $50. And they can fit through any hole that is that size. So this giant octopus that could fill this hole, the arm span of this room, can usually fit through the hole sometimes the size smaller than a quarter. And one of my colleagues was telling me a story recently about they sometimes come when we do camps here, they'll be doing feedings of the octopus, and the kids can see it. And they were watching, and our octopus was coming up towards the top of the water, and they're like, interesting. And then all of a sudden they saw one of its arms go over the side of the tank, and they immediately got life science, who was just like, no, we're gonna put you back in here, gave them some food to distract them, made them very happy. And if you come to visit now, you'll notice there's a mesh netting over our tanks to kind of prevent similar escape incidents from happening. So in addition to our octopus, we also have many marine birds and mammals. So one of the kind of popular birds right now is our tuft puffin. So usually these birds are all black, but during the mating season, the breeding season during the summer, they grow these yellow, these white heads, and then they will have this bright yellow plume that also comes up. So if you come now to the aquarium, you can see our puffins in their breeding colors, which is kind of a really special thing to see. But I would say that probably along with our octopus, our other really popular animals are marine mammals. So we have harbor seals, fur seals, and river and sea otters. So this is one of our harbor seals here. And one thing that many people will notice when they come to aquariums is seeing the training that happens with our marine mammals. And I think that some people, it can kind of channel certain ideas about performance. You know, some people think oh, you're putting these animals on display in a performative way. And what usually our caretakers are showing are training that we do that actually help us to care for animals. And so because we are doing veterinarian visits, we're having to sometimes transport them from places to place. We train them to do certain behaviors, which usually mimic something that they would also do in nature, like raising a flipper, which is a way for our vets to actually do blood draws, to do exams, training them to kind of follow. You can see there's that red ball there, that's a target. So being able to follow that so that they can move on to a scale to get weighed so we can keep track of their weight. We also have to train them to be prepared for evacuation procedures if there was, say, an earthquake here. And so they're trained how to follow their caretakers very quickly with certain signals, and also how to shelter in place away from other animals if incidents arise. And then, so you'll notice, so our sea otters, I love them. They're really chubby. They have that big layer of blubber that keeps them warm in our really cold water. We also have our sea otters. And one thing that's unique to sea otters is that they actually don't have any blubber. What they have is they have very, very dense fur. They have over 1 million hairs per square inch. It's the densest pelt of any mammal in the world. And what that does is it helps to keep them warm. However, in order to do that, they have to kind of constantly create air pockets. So you will often see images of you'll often see, if you come to the aquarium, you'll see otters that are doing this grooming behavior. So I have a video of this, I think in the next slide. So you can kind of see how they kind of are roughing their fur. And I kind of think of if you've ever had a down coat and maybe you packed it away and then you shake it to kind of fluff it up again to make sure that it's well insulated. That's what sea otters are doing when you see them grooming their fur. They're also removing any oils that might be from food that they've eaten, so that gets off and they're able to be really fluffy. And the reason they have to do this so constantly is that in this next video that you'll see of our sea otter diving, you can kind of see there's a trail of bubbles that's following behind them. And that's all of the air bubbles that they've put into their fur kind of being forced out by the water pressure. And so otters have to spend 30% of their time grooming to replace that air every time after they dive. So because of that, they require a lot of food. So this is an example of the food that just one of our sea otter eats in one day. They typically have to consume between 750 and 850 calories per day, which is about 12 pounds of seafood. And here at the aquarium, just like we were talking about sustainable seafood, we make sure that all of the food that our animals eat is also restaurant grade quality, sustainably harvested food. So can create quite a bill. So that is why we really appreciate all of the visitors who come to check out our programs, because it actually supports to feed all of our animals and to maintain their care. And I wanted to make sure to include this picture because you can imagine from the week that we've been having that having a fur coat that can keep you warm in 50-degree water in the summer is not always the most comfortable, especially if you want to get above water. So our caretakers will also, in the summertime, we'll sometimes fill kiddie pools with ice. It's both a way to help keep our otters cool and also provides an enrichment for them so that they stay mentally stimulated all year round. So those are my slides. And then I know that we started just a few minutes late. We were scheduled to end at 12:45. Is it possible for us to go a little bit past that, or is that like a hard cutoff?
No, you can go as long as you want. Absolutely.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually show our animals here first, because in our animals, one second, one of them is trying to escape. Yeah, we only keep them in these bins for about an hour so that we make sure that the water is well oxygenated and so they don't become stressed. So I'm just going to switch to a different camera and give you a close-up of some of our tide pool animals. And let me just see. So, okay, so we've switched to this camera. So this is one of my favorites, my new favorite, which is our moss crab. And you'll notice, I actually go under the water. Let's see.
It's a little hard to hear you. Maybe you need to bring the mic with you.
Yes, can you hear me now?
That's a little better, yes.
Okay, so this is our moss crab. And if you notice the outside of it, it's kind of covered with different algae. It also has some sponges growing on it. And it uses it, so most crabs have a really hard, smooth shell. But this one, if you can kind of look, I'm gonna see if I can get closer to its legs. Sometimes I gotta see if I can get it to focus. One sec. Yeah, so you can kind of see this close up. It's covered with lots of little, it has a very, almost like a mossier furry carapace. And that allows different algae to grow on it to camouflage. And I like it because it kind of moves. I'm trying to move very slowly so I don't make anyone here sick. I'm gonna try to find its mouth. Under.
Ooh, there.
Oh, yeah. There it is. You can kind of see those mouth parts moving around. So mini crabs are scavengers. They'll eat particles in the water. They can tear apart dead fish. The moss crab reminds me of a sloth that moves really, really slowly to kind of help with that camouflage. And this buddy loves to try to check out what's happening whenever we do our programs, likes to kind of check things out. So this is our moss crab. I'm going to kind of back up a little bit, get some other views. And now, as I'm showing the animals, feel free to unmute, ask questions about them as I'm showing them off.
God, there's like 5 different species of organisms on this thing too. That's amazing.
Okay, so we're going to go here to some fish to some animals that most people might be familiar with eating. but maybe you don't see usually in their live stage. So we have here, I think this is a horse mussel, is that right?
Yeah.
And you can see it's kind of attached to this rock. And it was with our giant scallop over here. So you can see our scallop is covered with all kinds of other critters. I'm going to try to see if I can get underneath here. Give me one sec. Okay, so you can kind of see this is where, so scallops are filter feeders. And if you look closely, try not to shake the table, you might see these little silver dots that are showing up. Those are the scallop's eyes. So it has these little tiny, you can kind of see there, they look like they're like glow in the dark. So scallops are kind of surrounded by these eyes that kind of function as a compound eye, allowing them to see if there's shadows. So if you ever come to a fish tank or you see one, you can hold your hand over and they'll close up. This one looks like they're just about to maybe start to open up.
I can see the tentacles around the metal too. That's cool. All those little things sticking out.
And then if you see these hair-like threads here, these are actually from that mussel. So they were attached together when we got them. And these threads are called byssal threads. So mussels hold on to rocks using these threads or other animals. And they're actually stronger than steel that would be that similar width. They're kind of one of the strongest threads of this diameter created by animals in the world. So many people are kind of surprised. I'm going to kind of put my finger here for comparison, but many people are kind of surprised at the size of our scallops. But for most people, if you ever eat scallops, you're only eating the abductor muscle, which is what they use to hold their shells shut. But like with sorry, I'm just tapping our mossy crab back in the water. But like things like our sea otters, they're eating all of the internal organs, all of the muscles inside of these animals to make sure they're getting all of those calories. Okay. And our last animal is our moon snail. So, Kent, would you mind moving this mic just a little bit closer? Kind of shifting down the table. So many people will find the shells of the moon snails on the beach. I've heard some people call these shells whale eyes because from a certain angle, they can look like an eyeball. Another thing that people will find is they'll find what are called the moon snail collars, which is where they lay their eggs. Maybe we'll throw up a picture a little bit afterwards of what those look like if you ever find them on the beach. Many people think it's trash or like a leftover piece of plastic or a plunger, but they're actually the leftover egg casings. So one thing, if you think about snails, most snails kind of have their soft mantle or body part kind of underneath or inside their shell. Moon snails can kind of work one of two ways. So this one, I'm kind of trying to encourage it to kind of release its mantle a little bit. So they can kind of spread out, but they also will cover their whole body or their whole shell with this, with the mantle. And one thing and fill it up with water. And that allows them to look much larger than they actually are to a predator that might be trying to eat them. They're also covered with a pretty slimy mucus that's also a pretty big discouragement. And you can kind of see here, moon snails, to our knowledge, don't have eye stalks the way that normal snails do. They're mostly night feeders, but they do have these two antenna-like organs that help them to sense movement in the water. And so they can kind of detect if something's kind of coming close to them or not. And then also there's, I think this is part of their siphon, if I'm correct. And this is something that they can stick above water to bring in extra oxygen. So this is our moon snail. Yeah, you can kind of see a little bit of that mucus trail there coming off of it. We were at the beach and we collecting data for one of our community science programs. Both Kendra and I were doing that last week. It was one of my first times to actually see a live moon snail on the beach. Normally I only see just the shells, but it was a super low tide. So they were all kind of hanging out, making some of those sand collars. Okay, so I'm gonna switch back to my other camera and answer any questions you have about the animals, things I've talked about, other things at the aquarium. Okay, and you might see one of my colleagues, Brad, who's going to be coming in and taking our animals and returning them to their classroom holding tank. So yeah, so any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm wondering about the sea stars and whether they are recovering.
Yeah, so I know that there has been some recovery. Kent is going like this. Nowhere near where they were before. So it's still a situation that they're monitoring. One thing, so I was mentioning our community science program. So one of our programs that we do is actually with local high schoolers, we go to our beaches and we've been collecting data for 15 years at the same spot every year to kind of look at the biodiversity. So we've kind of seen this decline in sea stars. We're still going through we're going to be analyzing that data. That'll be another great source of kind of seeing where do we see evidence of recovery of sea stars on our local beaches.
Brad was just saying it's not getting worse as far as we can tell from that monitoring, so that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
For recovery.
I don't know if you heard that, but Kent was saying that it's not getting worse. So that's a good sign.
Any questions?
Can I, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say one last thing. The reason that the impact of sea star wasting disease is that has kind of had an interesting rippling effect because of their place in the food chain as being almost like as a predator. So sea stars, one of their foods that they might eat is urchins. And so, and urchins like to eat kelp. So because there has been less sea stars eating the urchins, we've had more sea urchins that have eaten more kelp. And that is a really important habitat, especially for for what?
Rockfish, for example.
Yeah, for rockfish. It provides a lot of protection. It also kind of, I think similar to eelgrass, can kind of be almost like a nursery setting for growing fish because it provides a lot of places for young animals to hide. So that's been a reason why restoring sea stars has been so important, is to also then the ripple effect of maintaining our kelp habitats in the area. Yeah.
And who eats the urchins? Who eats the urchins? Is it
Urchins? Sea otters eat urchins. Who else eats urchins?
I mean, a few other things, like there's some, like some of the sharks and skates, like things like that will eat them. But I mean, urchins, like their main prey are mostly the sea otters and those sea stars that are adapted to eat them. So they don't have a whole lot of prey or predators.
They're very effective. Those spines are a big deterrent for most animals.
And so many of their predators have been threatened or endangered, or their numbers have decreased. So, you know, the otters could take over and you know, fill in for the sea stars, but as you probably know, sea otters also aren't exactly, you know, at their best population numbers right now either. So plenty of food, but there's other factors for them too, for their recovery.
Great. Other questions? Did I answer the question that you had earlier, or do you still have, there is something?
Are you asking about my question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just the guy in the background, but I'm thinking about people who are watching this in the future on channel 370 is what our in-house channel is. A lot of our residents are very practically minded. They're also very ecological, and they love their neighborhood. So they know not to throw litter on the ground because they're going to see it and that kind of thing. But what can we do to preserve and maintain the unique ecosystem, marine ecosystem of Green Lake? Is that a question that you're prepared to answer?
Yeah, I can talk about Green Lake, and I think that a lot of the things that are important for Green Lake are important for all water, freshwater and marine ecosystems share some similar challenges. So I would say that when we look at our waters within both our freshwater and Puget Sound, our number one source of pollution is runoff. So if you're not familiar, runoff is what happens when it rains and anything that is left over on the surface kind of gets washed in. So we might think about trash. We can also think about things like pet waste is another big source. Any types of, so things from cars like auto fluids. If you go to a car wash, like a lot of that stuff goes straight into our waterways. So thinking about the products, the soaps that we use, how much are they biodegradable? And also thinking about things like pesticide use. If you have a garden, how can you think about finding natural ways to control pests? So I think a lot of times we might have this idea that, oh, we just need to use organic pesticides. But the reality is that organic pesticides are still a form of runoff. And so instead, what we try to think about are ways that you can use plants and beneficial insects to control pests within your garden. So for example, we do a summer program, and one of our giveaway items are marigolds, because marigolds are known to be a natural pest deterrent. So when you're thinking about if you have a small garden area, thinking about learning about the plants you can grow that will minimize your need to use pesticides and fertilizers. The other big thing that we kind of can think about, which can be, okay, so also with runoff, I think another piece is having less impervious surfaces like asphalt. So the more that we have gardens, grass, having those types of ground cover around bodies of water, those can help to naturally filter out runoff. So I know that Seattle has a rain garden program that actually helps to capture, helps you to think about how you can structure garden areas in your neighborhoods. And it can actually be something that schools and small businesses, retirement communities, you could even partner with schools to help create rain gardens around your property to kind of minimize runoff in that area.
Excellent. Very good. Very thorough answer. Thank you.
Yeah.
I just want to add too, just about Green Lake in particular, because it is almost completely closed basin too. So all the runoff things that, that flow into Green Lake from the surrounding neighborhood, all the things that flow in from storm drains, like they don't really have a good way to escape. And there's treatment that's done, especially like on the south end of the lake, to kind of mitigate that. But yeah, runoff, especially into the lake from that surrounding community is a big deal. So yeah, anything you can do to either, make sure that there's those, surfaces that absorb those natural planted areas, things like that. Like it's particularly important there. So I'm glad that that's on folks' mind.
And one last thing that we talk a lot about here, especially in our marine environments, but also affects freshwater, is microplastics. And so you might not think about, I'm sure that residents might not be throwing trash on the sidewalk, but even when we put our trash either in the trash can or in the recycling, in that transportation, there's often, you'll see it if you've ever seen garbage collection, some trash will fall. And so we kind of think about how can you minimize the waste that you're even putting into your trash or recycling. So we talk a lot about reusable water bottles, reusable cups, reusable bags, all of those to minimize those plastics that can enter our ecosystem and can break down and start to accumulate in animals and kind of magnify up our food chain.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Well, I hope so. If folks who watch this video do have questions that come up from what I've talked about, they can send emails through you, and you can email us, and we're happy to respond back with those questions. So I don't know if you've been talking with Cameron or Brad, but any of those people, if you have questions, shoot them our way. We're happy to answer them or find someone here who's an expert and can answer them.
Yes, Cameron has been very patient with us, and we really got this thing in the last couple minutes. So I appreciate him. I appreciate your presentation, Rachel. It's very informative, and help from Kent that you had with. Was that Kent that you had with you? Thank you.
Kent.
You do wonderful work there. I'm glad that Diane and Steve were here and able to enjoy this, and we will have literally dozens of people watching this in the future. So this is going to be kind of a gift that keeps on giving to our nonprofit here at the Hearthstone, and hopefully more to come. Maybe you can, as things open up, you can bring that octopus over to Green Lake.
Oh, I would love to bring the octopus. And we do just like to remind folks that the aquarium is open to the public, and right now we're using a timed admission ticket system. So if you want to come down, you can order those tickets online, or you can just come down and see all of our amazing animals in person.
Wonderful.
Great. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. And let's stay on for a moment after we stop recording. Okay.
Oh, yep.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.